On the shores of Tamil Nadu, on the eastern coast of peninsular India, is a marvelous town of temples carved out of the rock. Mamallapuram was one of the greatest seafaring ports of ancient times. Coins found here testify to extensive trade with Rome and other places since at least the 1st century. By the end of the 6th century, the Pallava rulers from present-day Andhra Pradesh extended their control over much of Tamil Nadu and created the first large empire of South India. It is from the time of the rule of King Mahendra from 600 to 630 AD that numerous inscriptions have been found, and Pallava history is documented. This port town was called Mamalai, or Great Hill. Mahendra's successor, Narasimhavarman, known as Mamalla, or the Great Warrior, expanded the facilities of the port. Ships sailed constantly from here to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. Narasimhavarman changed the name of the port to Mamallapuram, or City of Mamalla. Here, over perhaps 100 years, from about 630 to 728 AD, marvelous monuments were cut out of outcrops of hard grey granite. Cliff faces were transformed into a teeming world of animals and people. Boulders were carved into fine temples. Rocks were chiseled into the shapes of animals. The magnificent temples of Mamallapuram reflect fully developed styles of South Indian temples. Obviously, such temples must have been made for a long time prior to this period. The earlier ones must have been made out of ephemeral materials and have not survived. Facing the ancient port, and not very far from it, is one of the marvels of the sculptural art of India. A granite hill face, almost 100 feet by 50 feet, has been transformed into a world of divine and earthly beings. This giant relief is believed to be of the early or middle 7th century. This tableau presents the auspicious moment of the descent of the river Ganga to bestow her blessings and her treasure of fertility to the world. Some scholars have also interpreted the scene to be of the penance of Arjuna, the hero of the epic Mahabharata. A deep cleft in the rock has been artfully used to represent the great river as she descends. In fact, there is a storage tank made above. On ceremonial occasions, water could be let out to rush down the cleft, giving a sense of reality to the sacred scene. We see Bhagiratha, the sage, performing great penance and imploring Shiva to bear the force of the fall of the river from heaven. Next to him stands Shiva, whose gesture indicates that he is granting a boon to the ascetic. Nagas and Naganis, divine serpents who live in the waters, are made swimming up the river. A teeming world in a forest has been created, About 100 figures of animals, men, women, and divine beings all turn in reverence towards the life-giving river. These are all made approximately life-sized and with great sensitivity and naturalism. Below Shiva we see a shrine of Vishnu with an elderly sage and disciples before him. Beside the river, other ascetics perform puja and penance. On the opposite bank is a charming depiction of a penance-performing cat. He has deluded the mice into believing that he is an ascetic. This could be a story from the Mahabharata, in which it is a sad fate which overtook the trusting mice. It could also be a witty comment being made by the artists on hypocrisy in contemporary practices.
The Pallava kings may have been the patron, but there does not seem to have been the sort of strict control or strict demand on the details of the art, so we have this impression that artists had a lot of freedom.
In the Indic vision, there is no marked division between the divine and the earthly. All that there is sacred. There is a grace which underlies all that is around us. Our response to that grace when we see it is considered to be a moment when we see a glimpse of the truth. Bringing this realization to us is the purpose of Indian art. All forms and all deities are a means towards the realization of the inherent unity of the whole of creation.
What you see there is the sense of a subliminal continuity among realms, whether it be human, animal, vegetable or divine. The world is seen as a fabric or a continuous texture of emotions, impulses, life forms, and to my mind that is an expression of the manner in which Indian religious and aesthetic thought has approached the world as a great tapestry of interconnected things, where if you were to cut or break one part of this tapestry, you would actually damage the whole.
The realism and lifelike softness of the elephants is remarkable. The details of the baby elephants show the artist's deep concern for all the beings of the world. Another detail of a deer scratching his nose shows great sensitivity and observation of the natural world.
And they not only portrayed gods and goddesses, but also human beings. Not only human beings, but also animals, birds, the wild animals, the domestic animals, the birds, all part of the whole life. The way in which they have blended the whole life shows their perception of the environment, their perception of art, the purpose of the art.
Close by is another relief depicting the same subject. However, it is unfinished. A little to the left of the great descent of the Ganga, a Krishna Govardhan is carved out of a boulder. Lord Krishna holds up the Govardhan mountain to protect the village from the fury of the storm. It is a charming scene. With peace restored and the storm forgotten, a cowherd plays the flute. Another milks a cow. This is one of the finest depictions of rustic life in Indian art.
Where Krishna is portrayed as lifting the whole mountain with one of his hands. When the sculpture was carved in the Pallava times, Behind Krishna's sculpture there was the whole hill. There was nothing in front of Krishna, and if you stand before it, you will see Krishna actually lifting the hill. But somewhere around 16th century, somebody thought this is Krishna's sculpture, so he built a mandapa in front.
The scene of village life that populates this long, long, low composition, and the portrayal of the animals and the herdsmen, and the way that they turn, they seem to be turning in the rock with their shoulders to the audience, this sort of fluidity. They don't look at you straight frontally, but they're sort of angled into the rock. This is something, I think, which is lost in later Indian sculpture.
The soft rendering and slender forms of the Pallava idiom are again seen in the Varaha Mandapa of around the middle of the 7th century. Here we also see the developments of Pallava iconography and architectural styles. Seated lions made on the bases of pillars are characteristic. There are 4 major sculptural panels in the cave. Vishnu is seen in the Varaha Avatara. He saves the earth goddess Bhudevi from being submerged in the ocean. All Indian myths operate at many levels, and this would also signify the saving of mankind from the ocean of ignorance. Vishnu is again presented in the form of Trivikrama, the conqueror of the 3 worlds. The rear wall of the cave has Gajalakshmi made on it. Lakshmi, who represents prosperity, is here lustrated by elephants. Also on the rear wall is a relief of Durga, who represents victory over ignorance. In Pallava art, the figures are slender and delicately made. The scale is naturalistic. A very unusual form of a cave is made on the outskirts of Mamallapuram. 11 vyalas, or lions with horns, are made on the facade. One of the most magnificent depictions in Mamallapuram is that of Mahishasuramardanī, made in a 7th century cave. It is entirely different from earlier representations of this subject. Durga, a feminine aspect of Shiva, battles the demon buffalo or Mahisha, who represents the evil of ignorance. It is a most animated scene, and unlike before, the scale is naturalistic. Here the demon has a human body and the head of a buffalo. The natural poses of the figures, advancing from one side and pulling back upon the other, enhances the drama and realism of the subject. The self-assured gunners of Durga's army of righteousness are unforgettable. The Adi Varaha cave is notable for having the portraits of King Narasimhavarman with his queens. There is also a representation of his son with his wives. After the period of the Kushanas, who had portraits made of themselves in royal shrines in the 1st century, these are the earliest surviving portraits of Indian kings. In early India, the purpose of art was always to take our thoughts away from the passing reality of the world to that which was eternal. Therefore, art did not traditionally depict ephemeral personalities. From here onwards, we see a shift taking place, and emphasis begins to come upon the personality of the monarch. There are 9 monolithic freestanding temples cut out of boulders. 5 of them are in one group. These are the earliest such edifices in India to be carved both on the outside and the inside out of rock. These are popularly called rathas or temple chariots. This is a misnomer as they are meant to be temples. They are a marvelous record in stone of the many forms of temple architecture in South India at that time.
You find the Pallava temples are like beautiful sculptures. Each temple, it is not the architecture that overtakes you, but it looks like a beautiful sculpture.
The monoliths are named after the 5 Pandava brothers of the Mahabharata epic and their common wife, Draupadi. They form a coherent group and were probably made in the middle of the 7th century. The smallest temple is called the Draupadi Ratha. It has a curved roof, which is believed to be modelled after the thatched roofs of that period. The shrine is dedicated to Durga. The lion on which she rides is made outside the temple. Arjuna's Ratha shares the same platform with the Draupadi Ratha. This is an early example of a developed Dravid or South Indian styled temple. The 2-tiered pyramidical roof is capped by a dome-like element called a stuti. In South India, the term shikhara refers to this crowning element, whereas in North India, shikhara means the whole temple tower. Half figures are made on the upper levels, which convey the impression that they are partly hidden owing to the viewer's perspective from below. Bhima's Ratha is a rare record of a barrel-vaulted temple type. The long shape is appropriate for the large depiction of the reclining Vishnu, which remains unfinished inside. The unfinished Dharmaraja Ratha is the largest of the group. Inscriptions with the name of Narasimhavarman I, also known as Mamalla, suggest that the temple was begun in his time. It presents the fully developed southern temple style as seen in the Arjuna Ratha. These form the basis of the temples to come in the later Chola, Vijayanagara and Nayaka periods. A portrait here of King Narasimhavarman I is remarkable. It is unlike the relaxed postures of the other portraits of Pallava kings in the Adivaraha cave. This is made just like a deity in a niche and is accorded strict frontal formality. The unfinished structure shows how the sculptors cut the stone from top to bottom, using the uncut rock below as a platform to work from. The 5th temple of the group takes on an apsidal shape, which is not used very often in Indian temples. This is known as an elephant back-shaped temple. Interestingly, the sculptors have made an elephant right next to it, perhaps to illustrate the point. Built right next to the lapping waves of the sea, one of the glories of Mamallapuram is a temple with 2 towers known as the Shore Temple. The finely worked slender towers are among the most beautiful of any structure in the Indian subcontinent. The temple was probably made by Narasimhavarman II, Rajasimha, in the early 8th century. He is believed to have established the tradition of building structural stone temples in Tamil Nadu. Below both the towers of the shore temple are shrines with Shivalingas. The rear walls of both have a relief panel showing Shiva, Uma, and their son Skanda. The group is known as Soma Skanda, and soon it becomes the favorite icon in Pallava shrines. It serves as a metaphor for the Pallava royal family. A shrine in between the two, dedicated to Shiva, has a depiction of the Anantasayana Vishnu. This is carved in situ out of an existing rock. Over 1,200 years of salt-laden winds have taken their toll, and the profusion of sculptures on the temple has been considerably eroded. However, what remains shows the highest standards of artistic achievement.
You find that the way in which they portray cows, birds, elephants, for example, is extremely close to the way we observe nature. And it seems very important for Indian sculptures to somehow communicate the breadth of these animals.
What gives the art of ancient India a special place is its vision of the world. A vision which sees the same in each of us, in men and women, in animals, plants, trees, even the breeze which moves the leaves. It sees a unity in the whole of creation, which imparts a great harmony and compassion to this vision. For 1,000 years of the prolific creation of sculpture, it was an art sponsored by the people. By the 7th and 8th centuries, inscriptions and royal portraits show that the Pallava kings began to take a direct interest in sponsoring the art. We will see in the centuries to come how this shapes the future of the art of India.